In the long history of human thought, there has always been an interest in beginnings. People across times and places have wondered about how the world began and about how life and the earth and the sky and even the gods themselves first came into being. The Greeks, who left us a large body of myths, stories, and traditions, were no different. And so, when we turn to what later generations called Greek mythology, we find that they too began their tales with an origin, with a beginning, with a moment in which nothing existed, and then something came to exist. The Greeks gave a name to this first state of nothingness, of emptiness, of absence. They called it chaos. And in saying this, we must understand that the word chaos, in the old sense, is not exactly the same as the modern word chaos that we often use today. Today we may say that chaos is disorder, that chaos is noise, that chaos is confusion. But in the Greek telling, chaos was less about noise and disorder and more about a void, more about a gap, more about a yawning emptiness. It was, as some described it, a kind of gaping chasm, a space that was not filled, an absence that yet had the potential to give rise to things. And from chaos, according to the accounts preserved for us, especially by the poet Hesiod in his Theogony, there began to appear other beings, other presences. The first of these was Gaia, the earth. She came forth not as a creation of someone else, but almost as a self-generated presence from within chaos itself. Gaia was the ground, the soil, the foundation upon which all later things would stand. She was the broad-bosomed earth, as Hesiod called her, the ever-sure foundation of the deathless ones who dwell on the peaks of snowy Olympus. Alongside Gaia there appeared also Tartarus, which was not a god in the same sense as Gaia, but was rather a deep place, a gloomy pit far beneath the earth, where in later stories the enemies of the gods would be confined. And there also appeared Eros, not yet the playful figure of love we think of from later tales, but a primal force of attraction, a binding principle that made creation possible. Now, the presence of Gaia, of the earth, was crucial, because from her there came forth many of the beings that shaped the early mythic universe. But before we move too quickly to her children, it is worth pausing, as the ancient tellers did, and reflecting slowly on what it meant to speak of earth as a goddess. In the Greek imagination, earth was not just soil, not just matter, but a living, fertile presence. When they spoke of Gaia, they meant the land beneath their feet, the fields, the mountains, the plains, the valleys. They meant the ground that nourished crops, that held graves, that sustained cities. To call the earth a goddess was to recognize its power, its mystery, its life-giving capacity. It is also worth noting that in these myths, the gods and beings that emerge are not exactly born in the way we think of human birth. They are not children in cradles, nor do they always have parents. Rather, they appear, they come forth, they take form. Chaos gives rise to Gaia, Gaia brings forth others, and so the genealogy of gods begins not with a human-like family, but with spontaneous generation, with beings appearing from the void or from one another without the process we know in human life. After Gaia there came forth Erebus, the darkness of the underworld, and Nyx, the night. These two were primordial presences, not yet gods with stories and personalities, but elemental aspects of the world, the darkness below and the darkness above. From Erebus and Nyx came ether, the bright upper air, and Hemera, the day. Thus, from darkness came light, and from night came day, establishing a rhythm that would shape existence. The Greeks, in telling this, were not describing literal scientific processes as we think of them today, but they were creating a story, a mythic account that gave shape to the world they saw around them. Night follows day, day follows night, the earth is below, the heavens are above, there are depths beneath. And in the telling of these stories, they gave these features of existence the form of beings, the dignity of gods. From Gaia, the earth, there came also the sky, known as Uranus, and here the myth grows more complicated, for Uranus was both a child of Gaia and later her consort. He was the starry heaven spreading above her, covering her, enclosing her, and with him Gaia produced many offspring, the Titans, the Cyclopes, and the Hecatonchires, the 100-handed ones. The Titans were 12 in number, and they would play a large role in the unfolding of myth. Among them were names that would echo through Greek religion and storytelling: Cronus, the youngest and most cunning; Rhea, who would later be the mother of Zeus; Oceanus, the Titan of the great encircling river; Hyperion, associated with the sun; Themis, the personification of divine order. The ancient poets told that after the first stirrings of chaos, and after Gaia, the broad-bosomed earth, had given birth to Uranus, the sky who stretched above her, the world was filled with new life. From the union of earth and sky came forth children of immense power, children who were both divine and elemental. Among them were the mighty Titans, beings vast in form and deep in significance, whose names echoed across the earliest memories of humankind. They were not mortals, and they were not yet the Olympians who would later rule, but something in between, a generation that carried both promise and peril. There were 12 who were spoken of most clearly: Oceanus, who was not the sea itself, but the endless river imagined to flow around the rim of the earth, forever encircling all lands; Coeus, whose presence suggested the poles of the heavens, the still point about which the stars revolved; Creus, dimly remembered, yet linked with the constellations and with the passing of seasons; Hyperion, the one who brought heavenly light, father of the sun, the moon, and the dawn; Iapetus, stern and fateful, who was tied to the destinies of men, and who would sire sons, both rebellious and burdened, such as Prometheus and Atlas; and then Cronus, the youngest, the most ambitious, and the one who would seize the throne from his father. Alongside them stood their sisters: Thea, radiant and shining; Rhea, who would become mother of the great Olympians; Themis, who embodied divine law and order; Mnemosyne, who was memory itself, and who would one day give birth to the Muses; Phoebe, bright and prophetic; and Tethys, the nurturing goddess of the waters. These 12 figures, though described as individual beings, were also symbols. To the Greeks, they were not merely tall and strong gods. They were the embodiment of natural forces and cosmic principles. They stood for the flow of water, the light of the heavens, the measure of time, the memory of the past, and the justice that governs both gods and men. To tell of them is to tell of the second shaping of the universe, when the raw chaos of beginnings gave way to a more ordered but still unstable world. Yet peace was not to be found under their father Uranus, for although he had sired them, Uranus feared his children. He looked upon their strength and their strange forms with dread. The Cyclopes, who possessed a single eye blazing in the center of their foreheads, and the Hecatonchires, who bore 100 hands and 50 heads, filled him with terror. And even the Titans, though nobler in shape, carried within them a power that might rival his own. In his fear, Uranus sought to keep them from rising. He forced them back into the womb of Gaia, pressing them deep into the earth from which they had been born. Gaia, the great mother, groaned beneath the weight of her children. Her body ached, her spirit raged, and in her suffering she resolved to bring an end to the tyranny of Uranus. She fashioned a sickle of unyielding adamant, sharp and curved, and she called upon her children to rise against their father. Yet most of them hesitated, for to strike at the sky itself was no small act. It was Cronus, the youngest and the most cunning, who stepped forward. He took the sickle into his hand, and when Uranus descended to lie with Gaia, Cronus struck. With one swift blow he severed the manhood of his father, and with that act the reign of Uranus was broken. From the blood that fell upon the earth, strange beings were born. The Erinyes, spirits of vengeance, rose up to punish crimes against kin. The giants also sprang forth, fierce and formidable, and from the foam that gathered around the severed flesh in the sea there emerged a new goddess, radiant and eternal, Aphrodite, the embodiment of love and desire, who would one day play her own part in the tales of gods and mortals alike. Cronus now stood as ruler of the cosmos, and the Titans entered into their age of dominion. The poets called it the Golden Age, a time when men, newly fashioned upon the earth, lived in ease and abundance, untouched by sorrow, untroubled by toil, and unshadowed by death. The earth gave freely of her fruits, rivers flowed with bounty, and humankind dwelled without need of laws or punishments. Yet beneath this golden peace there stirred unease, for Cronus had heard a prophecy, spoken either by Uranus or by Gaia herself, that he too would be overthrown by one of his own children. Fearful of this fate, Cronus took a dreadful course. Each time Rhea bore him a child, he swallowed the infant whole. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon were all consumed by their father, shut away in the darkness of his belly. Rhea wept in despair, for though she was mother of many, she was permitted to keep none. But at last, when her sixth child was born, she sought a way to save him. She went in secret to the island of Crete, and there she delivered the infant. The war of the Titans, long and violent, had finally reached its end. The Olympians, younger gods who had risen under the leadership of Zeus, had overthrown the ancient order and cast the Titans into the deep abyss of Tartarus. The chains of defeat were heavy upon the fallen generation, and the great pit, surrounded by walls of bronze, guarded by the Hecatoncheires with their 100 arms, became the eternal prison for those who had once ruled the cosmos. From this moment onward, the world stood at the threshold of a new order, shaped not by the raw power of primordial beings or the heavy-handed dominion of the Titans, but by the will and cunning of Zeus and his kin. The struggle for supremacy had been costly, but its resolution brought clarity. The cosmos was not to remain divided, nor to collapse back into chaos, but to be arranged into realms, each governed by its proper ruler. This was the moment where lines were drawn, both in heaven and beneath, setting a structure that Greek myth would hold on to for centuries. Zeus, the victor and the one most responsible for leading the revolt, became the natural candidate for kingship. His siblings recognized his strength and his authority, though the decision was not left to sheer will alone. Tradition tells that the three brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, drew lots to determine the spheres of their dominion. By chance or by fate, the sky fell to Zeus, the sea to Poseidon, and the underworld to Hades. Though one might wonder whether these divisions were truly accidental, the outcome reflects a balance. The heavens for the thunder-wielding Zeus, the oceans for the trident-bearing Poseidon, and the shadowy realm of the dead for Hades, who was perhaps most suited to such a grim task. The world was not simply carved in three, however. The earth itself, the broad land upon which mortals lived and gods walked, remained common ground. It was neutral territory, shared by all. Olympus, though elevated, was placed upon the earth, and it would soon become the shining palace of the new rulers. Mount Olympus, tall and cloud-capped, rose as the center of divine presence. No mortal foot could climb its full height, and no human eye could behold its peak clearly. There the Olympians gathered, each granted a place in the assembly of gods. Halls of gold and marble were said to line its summit, shining with a brilliance unmatched by earthly structures. The gods dined on ambrosia, drank nectar, and their laughter echoed like thunder across the skies. This was no ordinary dwelling, it was the symbol of their rule, a palace suspended between heaven and earth, unreachable yet always present. Zeus took his throne at the head of this assembly. His thunderbolt, forged by the Cyclopes during the Titanomachy, became the symbol of his might and his weapon of choice. The thunderbolt was not merely a tool of destruction, it represented divine authority, the power to enforce law among gods and men. With it, Zeus could maintain order, punish rebellion, and preserve the fragile balance between divine and mortal spheres. Beside him stood Hera, who would later become his wife and queen. Her presence on Olympus signified not only the union of king and queen, but also the establishment of family as a principle among the gods. Hera's domain was marriage, though her story with Zeus was fraught with tensions and quarrels. Yet in the early days of Olympus, what mattered most was the creation of a pantheon, a household of gods whose roles would shape myth and morality. Poseidon, lord of the sea, dwelt not only on Olympus but also in the depths of the ocean. His palace beneath the waves, glittering with coral and adorned with pearls, reflected his dominion. Sailors prayed to him, and storms rose at his command. The trident, his weapon, could stir the seas into fury or calm them into peace. Though his realm was distant from Olympus, he remained one of the central Olympians, a brother whose influence could not be ignored. Hades, meanwhile, withdrew into the underworld. Unlike his brothers, he rarely set foot on Olympus, preferring the silence and shadow of his realm. His dominion was not one of joy, but of necessity. The dead belonged to him, and though mortals feared his name, his rule was not cruel, it was inevitable. Hades maintained order in the underworld, ensuring that souls found their place, that boundaries between life and death were respected. In his realm lay the rivers, Styx, Lethe, Acheron, Cocytus, and Phlegethon, each carrying its own meaning and role. Though feared, Hades was essential. Without him, the cycle of life could not be complete. Thus, the three brothers ruled, each in his sphere, and Olympus became the seat of their joint order. Yet rule did not rest solely with them. Other deities, born from Cronus and Rhea, or from earlier lineages, took their places on Olympus. Hestia, goddess of the hearth, presided over fire and domesticity. Demeter, goddess of the harvest, governed the fertility of the fields and the sustenance of humankind. These sisters, alongside Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, and Hades, formed the original Olympian family. In time, others would join: Athena, Apollo, Artemis, Ares, Hephaestus, Hermes, and later Dionysus, expanding the circle of divine influence. But before their tales unfolded in fullness, the cosmos itself had to be stabilized. The victory of Zeus was not merely a change in leadership, it was a reordering of the world. The threat of the Titans was gone, but challenges still loomed. For even as Olympus rose in splendor, the giants, born of the blood of Uranus, lingered in the earth. Their day of rebellion would come. The monstrous Typhon, child of Gaia and Tartarus, had yet to rise against Zeus. The order was fragile, and the gods remained vigilant. Yet in these early times there was peace enough for the gods to shape the mortal world. Humans existed already, fashioned by the hands of Prometheus, though their lives were harsh and uncertain. Fire, withheld from them by Zeus, was gifted through Prometheus's daring theft, an act that brought both progress and punishment. Humanity's rise was inseparably tied to the dealings of gods, for divine will determined their fate as much as their own labor. The Olympians, from their thrones, looked down upon the mortal world with varying degrees of interest. Some, like Demeter, nurtured humanity by giving grain and teaching the arts of agriculture. Others, like Ares, brought strife and bloodshed. Athena guided mortals with wisdom and craft, while Hermes taught them cunning and trade. Each god reflected an aspect of human existence, for the myths were never only about divine beings. They were mirrors of the mortal condition, clothed in immortal form. The shaping of the cosmos after the Titanomachy was therefore both divine and human. The gods established their hierarchy, yet their influence stretched downward, weaving myth into the lives of mortals. Rituals, sacrifices, and prayers began to form as men sought to honor the gods who held sway over their fortunes. The smoke of offerings rose to Olympus, carrying with it the hopes and fears of countless souls. And so, in the calm that followed the storm of war, a new order stood. The heavens, the sea, and the underworld had their rulers. Olympus shone as the seat of power. Humanity found its place beneath divine eyes. But the story of Greek myth was never still. Conflict, love, betrayal, and struggle would return. For the gods were not distant abstractions, but beings of passion, prone to quarrel and intrigue. The reign of Zeus had begun, yet its trials were only just unfolding. The world of myth is one of cycles, of wars followed by fragile peace, of order always shadowed by chaos. The Titanomachy had been one such cycle, and in its wake came the Olympian age. But the seeds of future conflicts lay already in the soil of the cosmos, waiting to sprout. Giants would rise, monsters would test the strength of Zeus, mortals would rebel or falter under the weight of divine will. The balance achieved was temporary, as it always was. Yet for now, in this moment of myth, the order of Zeus stood firm. Olympus gleamed, the gods took their places, and the cosmos breathed in a rhythm of stability. From the high throne of Zeus, thunder echoed not as war but as law, declaring to all beings that the age of the Olympians had arrived. When the Titanomachy ended and the Olympians established their rule, it seemed for a moment that order had finally prevailed. Zeus held the skies, Poseidon commanded the seas, and Hades kept the underworld. Mount Olympus rose as the shining seat of the gods, and mortals began to find their place under divine law. Yet peace, in myth as in history, was never absolute. For the earth itself, Gaia, still grieved for her fallen children, the Titans who had been cast into the dark prison of Tartarus. Her sorrow turned into anger, and anger into vengeance. From her union with Tartarus, the deep abyss, there came forth a being unlike any that had walked before, Typhon. Typhon was not simply a monster, but the very embodiment of chaos reborn. Ancient poets describe him as vast beyond imagination, his form stretching across the horizon, his head sometimes said to brush against the stars. His body was a twisted mass of serpents, hundreds of coils writhing where legs should have been. His arms were immense, capable of reaching across continents. From his mouth poured fire, and his eyes burned with destructive fury. His voice was not one sound, but many, at times the bellow of bulls, the roar of lions, the hiss of serpents. When Typhon rose from the earth, the gods looked upon him with dread. For all their strength, none among them had seen such a being. Some fled in fear, disguising themselves as animals to escape his wrath. Apollo, Hermes, and even Aphrodite are said to have taken animal forms, scattering across the land. Yet Zeus did not flee. The Thunderer stood his ground, for it was his task to uphold the order he had established. If Typhon triumphed, the reign of the Olympians would end before it had truly begun. The battle between Zeus and Typhon was immense, shaking both heaven and earth. Zeus hurled his thunderbolts, each strike resounding like the crash of mountains. Typhon, undeterred, hurled whole mountains back at Zeus, tearing them from the earth. Fire and storm clashed against fire and storm, the heavens split by lightning and the earth torn by quakes. The struggle seemed endless, and for a time it appeared even Zeus might falter. Typhon seized him, stripping him of his thunderbolts and cutting the sinews from his hands and feet. Crippled, Zeus was carried to a distant cave and bound, his power nearly broken. Yet myths remind us that order, though fragile, finds allies. The trickster Hermes, often underestimated, stole into the cave where Zeus was held. With cunning and stealth, he recovered the sinews of the god and restored them to Zeus. Strength returned to the Thunderer, and with it the resolve to end the battle once and for all. Rising with renewed fury, Zeus gathered his thunderbolts and returned to confront Typhon. The final struggle was fierce and decisive. Zeus unleashed the full might of his lightning, striking Typhon again and again until the monster faltered. Flames consumed the sky, rivers boiled, and mountains crumbled under the force of their clash. At last, Zeus cast Typhon down, burying him beneath Mount Etna in Sicily. There the monster lay imprisoned, his rage not extinguished but contained. From time to time the earth still trembles and fire bursts forth from Etna's peak, a reminder of Typhon's restless fury beneath the surface. Thus the threat of Typhon was ended and Zeus secured his rule. No greater monster would ever rise to challenge him so directly. Yet the tale served as a warning that even after victory, chaos is never far away. Gaia's anger had birthed Typhon, and the gods could never assume their order would remain unchallenged. Still, the triumph of Zeus in this struggle confirmed his role as king not only by chance of lot, but by strength proven in battle. For mortals, the story of Typhon carried meanings as well. The eruptions of volcanoes, the tremors of earthquakes, and the sudden fury of storms were explained through his presence beneath the earth. Natural disasters were not random but signs of the monster's restless body straining against its prison. The myth thus bridged the world of gods and men, giving reason to the unpredictable violence of nature. In the quiet that followed Typhon's defeat, Olympus once again stood firm. The gods returned to their halls, and Zeus held his throne with greater confidence. Yet the lesson of the battle lingered, that even the king of gods must remain vigilant, for order is always tested, and power must be renewed through struggle. When the earth trembled under the fall of Typhon, it might have seemed that the last great challenge to Zeus had been defeated. The Thunderer sat once more upon his throne, his rule confirmed by strength and cunning. Yet, as with all stories woven into the tapestry of Greek myth, victory was never final, and peace was always fragile. For Gaia, the ancient mother of Earth, had not abandoned her fury. She had borne Typhon in grief and wrath after the Titans were cast down, and though that monstrous child was now imprisoned beneath Mount Etna, her resentment remained. She did not forgive Zeus for the suffering of her children, and from her pain and rage, she brought forth yet another generation of challengers, the giants. The giants were unlike mortals, unlike gods, and unlike even the Titans who had ruled before. Born from the blood of Uranus, spilled upon the earth when Cronus struck down his father, the giants carried within them both divine strength and primordial wildness. Their forms were vast, towering above mortals, their bodies armored in scales, and their legs often ending in the coils of serpents. Fierce and mighty, they were destined to oppose the Olympians, for they were born of the earth itself, and the earth demanded vengeance. The Gigantomachy, the great war between the gods and the giants, was a conflict as monumental as the Titanomachy and the struggle with Typhon. It was not a sudden battle, but a growing storm, whispered in prophecies and anticipated by both gods and mortals alike. For it was foretold that the giants could not be defeated by gods alone. Only with the aid of a mortal would the Olympians prevail. Such was the strange balance of fate that immortals, with all their power. The giants rose in fury, gathering upon the broad earth, their shouts echoing like thunder, their weapons fashioned from mountains and trees ripped from their roots. They hurled rocks that blotted out the sky, and their feet shook the land as they marched toward Olympus. Their leader, often named as Alcyoneus, was a giant of surpassing strength, immortal so long as he stood upon the soil of his native land. Another, Porphyrion, burned with lust and violence, seeking to overthrow even Zeus himself. Around them gathered countless others, Enceladus, Pallas, Cleidius, and more, each a force of nature, each a reflection of the earth's unyielding might. The Olympians prepared for war. Zeus stood at their head, his thunderbolts gathered once more, while Athena, goddess of wisdom and war, donned her gleaming armor. Poseidon rose from the sea with his trident, and Hera, Apollo, Artemis, and the rest took their places in the coming conflict. Yet they remembered the prophecy. Without the aid of a mortal, they could not win, so they sought one who might stand with them. It was Heracles, the great hero, who would fulfill this role. Though born of Zeus and thus carrying divine blood, Heracles was mortal, subject to the limits of human life. His strength, however, surpassed that of any ordinary man, and his courage made him a fitting ally for the gods themselves. By his presence, the balance of fate tipped toward Olympus. The war began with a fury that shook both heaven and earth. The giants hurled their weapons skyward, and the Olympians rained down fire and arrows in return. Zeus unleashed thunderbolt after thunderbolt, striking the vast bodies of the giants, while Poseidon shattered the ground beneath them with his trident. Athena, with her shield Aegis, advanced unyielding, and Apollo's arrows flew swift and deadly. The clash was immense, a struggle that mirrored the forces of nature itself, earth against sky, chaos against order. Yet the giants could not be slain by the gods alone. When Alcyoneus fell beneath Zeus' thunderbolt, he rose again, unhurt, for the soil of his homeland renewed his life. It was then that Heracles took aim with his bow, loosing an arrow that pierced the giant. As Alcyoneus staggered, Heracles dragged him from his native land, and once removed from its soil, the giant perished. Thus the prophecy was fulfilled. Only with the mortal's hand could the victory be won. Porphyrion, filled with fury, turned his strength against Hera, seeking to seize her by force, but Zeus struck him with a thunderbolt, and Heracles' arrow pierced him as he fell. Enceladus, another of the great giants, fled across the plain, but Athena hurled the island of Sicily upon him, crushing him beneath its weight. It was said that his body still burned beneath the ground, and the fire that sometimes erupted from the earth was as his restless breath. The battle raged on, each god and goddess confronting a foe. Dionysus, though later to join the pantheon, took his place in the struggle, brandishing his ivy-clad staff and striking terror into the hearts of his enemies. Hephaestus hurled molten metal upon the giants, while Artemis and Apollo shot their arrows unerringly. Hermes, swift of foot, darted through the fray, striking where least expected. Each god played a role. Each force of Olympus engaged against the chaos of earth. The war was not short, nor was it easy. The giants fought with the strength of mountains, their bodies vast and unyielding. But the combined might of gods and mortal hero at last overcame them. One by one they fell, slain by arrows, crushed by islands, struck down by thunderbolts. Their roars shook the earth as they died, and their bodies, vast as hills, lay scattered across the land. Some were buried beneath mountains, others cast into the sea, their forms becoming the landscape itself. When the Gigantomachy ended, Olympus stood triumphant once more. Zeus had proven his reign secure, not only through his own strength, but through the unity of gods and the strange aid of a mortal. The prophecy had been fulfilled, the giants subdued, and the order of the cosmos preserved. Yet the memory of the war lingered, carved into the myths that mortals told, painted upon the walls of temples, woven into the fabric of Greek culture. For the Gigantomachy was not merely a tale of battle, it was a symbol of the eternal struggle between chaos and order, between the untamed forces of earth and the structured rule of heaven. The long and winding traditions of Greek myth do not move with haste, nor do they easily conclude. For those who attempt to follow the tangled paths of genealogy, of war, of sacrifice, and of divine quarrels, the story becomes less a tale of single events and more a landscape, wide and heavy, where one episode passes gradually into another. By the time the listener reaches what may be called the later heroic age, the memory of the Titans and the early Olympians has grown distant, but the shadow of their deeds still lingers. In this part, we move slowly through the bridge that connects the age of the gods to the age of men, an age when mortals began to bear the weight of destinies shaped long before their birth. Even in the heroic age, the gods were never absent. Zeus still ruled upon Olympus, and Hera continued her endless resentments. Poseidon held dominion over the sea, and Athena gave her favor to cities and warriors. Yet the difference between these times and the primordial battles of titans and giants was clear. The gods no longer fought only among themselves, but they used mortals as their instruments. Heroes were guided, rewarded, or punished, and in their struggles one can see the slow preparation for the stories that would one day lead to the great Trojan War. It is important to pause on this transition, for Greek mythology is not a simple collection of isolated adventures. Instead, the myths form a chain, each link forged by the combination of divine will and human action. The gods still appeared in disguise. They still struck with thunderbolts or stirred the seas or sent plagues, yet more often they acted through chosen men and women. And so the myths of this era are less about cosmic balance and more about the fragile lives of those who carried both divine blood and mortal weakness. Greek myth often begins its heroic tales with genealogy. To understand the deeds of a hero, the ancient poets first explained his parentage. A hero's worth was measured by his connection to gods. Some were the direct children of Zeus, of Poseidon, or of Apollo. Others came from older mortal families that had, in earlier generations, been touched by the divine. This emphasis on lineage was not a mere detail. It was a way of framing human history as part of divine history. Perseus was the son of Zeus and Danae. Heracles, the most famous of all, was also a son of Zeus, though Hera's hatred pursued him relentlessly. Theseus, founder hero of Athens, was sometimes called the son of Poseidon, sometimes of Aegeus, a mortal king. The blending of mortal kingship with divine favor created the foundation for the idea that Greece itself was guided by higher powers. We must remember that in this world, kings were not ordinary rulers. Their legitimacy rested upon myth. To claim descent from Zeus, or from a god of the sea, or even from the dawn goddess, was to claim more than political power. It was to claim that one's place in the world was inevitable. Among the first of the great heroic tales was that of Perseus. His story, told in many versions, has become emblematic of the Greek heroic cycle. The tale begins with a prophecy. King Acrisius of Argos was warned that his daughter's son would kill him. In an attempt to prevent this, he locked his daughter Danae in a bronze chamber, but prophecy was stronger than iron, and Zeus, taking the form of golden rain, entered the chamber and fathered Perseus. Danae and the infant were cast adrift in a wooden chest, but they survived, reaching the island of Seriphos. There, Perseus grew under hardship until fate called upon him. Polydectes, the king of Seriphos, desired Danae and sought to remove Perseus. He demanded that the young man bring him the head of Medusa, one of the three Gorgon's sisters. This was no simple demand, for Medusa was deadly. Her gaze turned all living things into stone. Yet the gods intervened. Hermes gave Perseus winged sandals. Hades gave him the cap of invisibility. Athena offered a polished shield. With these gifts, Perseus was armed with divine aid, and he approached the cave where the Gorgons lay. The moment of the slaying is described with great solemnity in the ancient accounts. Perseus used the shield's reflection to avoid Medusa's gaze. He cut off her head with his sword, and from her blood sprang the winged horse Pegasus, as well as the warrior Chrysaor. Here we see the theme of transformation. From destruction came new life, and from terror emerged beauty. Returning with Medusa's head, Perseus used it to defeat his enemies. He turned Polydectes and his court to stone, freeing his mother from unwanted marriage. In his journeys he also rescued Andromeda, chained to a rock as sacrifice to a sea monster. She became his wife, and through their descendants entire dynasties were formed. Thus, the story of Perseus, though adventurous, was more than an entertainment. It was a myth of origins, linking families, kingdoms, and gods in an endless cycle. If Perseus belonged to the Argive tradition, then Theseus belonged to Athens. His myths served to explain the greatness of the Athenian people. Theseus, like Perseus, was given both mortal and divine parentage. His mother Aethra conceived him either with Aegeus, the mortal king of Athens, or with Poseidon, god of the sea. In this ambiguity, one sees the flexibility of myth, for Athens could claim both human legitimacy and divine favor. Theseus' adventures were many, but the most famous was his encounter with the Minotaur. The creature, half man and half bull, was confined within the labyrinth built by Daedalus for King Minos of Crete. Each year, Athens was forced to send youths as tribute, who were devoured by the beast. Theseus volunteered to end this horror with the help of Ariadne, daughter of Minos, who gave him a thread to find his way back through the labyrinth. He confronted and killed the Minotaur. This act freed Athens from humiliation and established Theseus as a protector of his people. Yet the story is not free of sorrow. When Theseus sailed back, he forgot to change the sails of his ship from black to white, the agreed signal that he had survived. His father Aegeus, watching from the cliffs, saw the black sails and, believing his son dead, threw himself into the sea. From this, the sea received its name, the Aegean. The myths of Theseus also included battles with Amazons, the strange warrior women from beyond the known world, and participation in the great Caledonian boar hunt. In each tale, Theseus appears as a figure of transition, half king, half hero, standing between divine assistance and mortal error. At this stage, one may pause to notice the common structure of Greek heroic myths. First comes divine or semi-divine birth, often linked with prophecy. Then follows exile, hardship, or a test of worthiness. Next appears a great trial, usually involving monsters or impossible tasks. The hero succeeds, often with divine help, and brings back something of value, whether freedom, a new dynasty, or knowledge. Yet almost always, sorrow accompanies the triumph. A family member dies, or a curse lingers, or the hero himself meets a tragic end. This pattern reflects the Greek understanding of human life. No victory is pure, no happiness is lasting. The favor of the gods is mixed with their cruelty. To live as a hero is to live in tension, always pulled between glory and destruction. Among all these heroes, none loomed larger than Heracles, son of Zeus and Alcmene. His story, vast and complicated, connects with nearly every other figure in Greek mythology. Though his labors will be the focus of later parts, here it is enough to note that his presence dominates the heroic age. Heracles represented both the highest strength and the deepest suffering. Hera's hatred drove him mad, causing him to kill his own wife and children, and as penance he was forced to undertake his 12 labors. These labors became symbols of endurance, of human struggle against chaos and beasts, of purification through toil. What is striking is that Heracles, though son of Zeus, suffered more than most mortals. His strength was unmatched, yet his life was one of constant trial. In this, Greek myth placed before the listener a paradox, that greatness is inseparable from suffering. In tracing the myths of Perseus, Theseus, and the foreshadowing of Heracles, we begin to see the shape of Greek myth as a bridge between divine and human. The early struggles of gods against titans are now distant memories, but the lessons of fate, prophecy, and divine interference remain. Heroes are born of gods, yet they are punished by gods as well. They conquer monsters, but they cannot escape sorrow. Their deeds form the foundation upon which later epics, especially the Trojan cycle, would stand. This is the rhythm of Greek myth, slow, heavy, repetitive, yet always moving forward. Each hero is not an isolated tale, but part of a chain that stretches back to the beginning of the cosmos and forward to the end of the heroic age. And so, as we conclude this 7th part, the listener may reflect on the pattern: prophecy, birth, trial, triumph, and sorrow. The names change: Perseus, Theseus, Heracles, but the structure remains. In this way, Greek mythology prepared its audience for the greatest of all myths, the long war before the walls of Troy, where the fates of men and gods would once again intertwine.